Okay, got it. Okay, so this week we're talking about God as God appears in the Talmud. Okay. So, first of all, what do we know about the Talmud? So let me say a couple of words about that. And I'm on a short leash here. Don't want to have things unplugged. There we go. But okay, who here on a scale of 1 to 10, where they say, I know what Talmud is 10, I can tell you what Talmud is. And who are more closer to the one is like, okay, I've heard of that, is that kind of like a table but with different consonants? Okay, so quick review. This is the most traditional, okay? That's Mount Sinai.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm telling
Use
you
your
that is an
imagination.
icon, that's a representative of Mount Sinai.
I'll accept that.
Okay? God gives Torah at Mount Sinai. Torah comes in 2 flavors, written and oral. The written Torah is what later on becomes the Bible. The oral Torah starts out being oral. God tells it to Moses. Moses tells it to Joshua. Joshua tells it to the leaders. The leaders tell it to the sages. The sages evolve into the rabbis. Okay? It's always from teacher to student, oral law. You know, here the written law will say, don't see the kid in his mother's milk. The oral law is, don't eat milk that's cooked with meat. Very simple, just not written down. Around the year 200, life is difficult for the Judeans living in Judea because the Romans they've had it with the Jews. Just let's be honest, we're annoying and the Romans have had it with us. And it seems like a good time to write it all down before we're all wiped out. So they write it down, and that is called the Mishnah. Now, what's interesting about the Mishnah is the Mishnah doesn't quote its sources. So it'll say, don't eat the kid and don't eat milk and meat together, but it won't say because it's written, don't see the kid in his mother's milk. No, it just tells you straight out. And so in a classic example, the Torah might say an eye for an eye. And the Mishnah would say, if you hit someone, you owe them 5 kinds of damage. You owe them damages in terms of pain, insults, lost income, cost of healing, and cost pain. That's kind of the heads of damage, right? The Mishnah is still discussed by the rabbis, and the rabbis have now branched off, and there's rabbis in Eretz Yisrael still, but there's also rabbis in Babylonia. There've been people in Babylonia since the original exile. And around the year 600 or so, the Talmud gets sort of crystallized. And so the Talmud is in Aramaic, and it's expansions on the Mishnah. So the Talmud to this might say, well, okay, how does that relate to an eye for an eye? And it'll discuss it and go into depth on it, right? The Talmud is 2,500 folios long, so that's both sides, each page. And the folios are big, and if you were to study a folio a day, you would get through the whole Talmud in 7.5 years, and there's some people who do that, and may God bless them. Okay. One other thing where we get some confusion, on a page of Talmud, there'll be a section of Mishnah, and a section of Gemara, and a section of Mishnah, and a section of Gemara, and the Mishnah is from that era, and the Gemara is from the Talmud era. We call this whole thing together Talmud, but actually this particular parts here are really the Talmud parts of the Talmud, these parts of the Mishnah. In the Talmud itself, it's not called Talmud because when we went to the Christian printing presses, they said, great, but you can't use this word in the Talmud. So we put Gumri Nun. It was completed instead. So we're going to be looking today at how is God expressed in the Talmud, which is to say, how is God expressed in the ways that the rabbis are talking about Jewish life. Now, did anyone read the essay for this week? Excellent.
Sort of.
So I want to share with you a quote from the essay. Can I erase this?
What?
The quote from the essay is, Talmud is present on every page, or God is present on every page of the Talmud, but often impossible to find. Well, that's my modification. It's like
That's basically what it means.
God is present on every page, but you gotta look for it. It's implicit. Okay. So far, so good? Okay. One of the things to share from the essay is that God has different names in the Talmud. So in the Bible, God has names like Elohim, which is, the judgy form of God, and Yud-He Vav-He, which is the lovey form of God, and El Shaddai, God Almighty, and El Elyon, God on high. Talmud names are interesting. One is Hamakom, the place, the omnipresent. If you remember from your Passover Seders where it talks about the omnipresent, that's Hamakom, the place. Okay? God's everywhere. Then there's Shamayim, the heavens, as in having Yirat Shamayim, fear of heaven, heaven as a synonym for God. So if Hamakom is omnipresent, is the place, that's the immanent form of God, and Shamayim is the transcendent. Okay, good. Then there's Ribono Shel Olam, master of the world. This is if you're talking to God. Ribono Shel Olam, here is my complaint. Or, you know this, right? Ribono, master of the world. Rahmana, which is the compassionate. Only once does it ever say Harachaman, which is Hebrew, but Rahmana is the compassionate one, okay? Often, Rahmana is mentioned in the context of delivering law which is harsh, but Rahmana, so it indicates that law is never harsh. The law is given to us in love. Think about Ahava Rabbah. Okay. Finally, the last name that God has in the Talmud is Shekhinah, which is God's presence. Okay. Shochen is like a dwelling. So God as it dwells amongst us. So let's look at a couple of texts and see if we can suss out some thoughts of how God is operating in the Talmud. And so our first text is from Yoma, page 69b, which the topic of Yoma is the topic of the order of the sequence of the sacrifices of Yom Kippur. But that doesn't mean anything because the Talmud is digression central. So, just here we are. So, looking at the text. Okay. So they're talking about the transmission of God here. And let's take a look here. So, Arlene, why don't we start with you?
Okay. Rabbi Joshua ben Levi said, "Why were they called the men of the Great Assembly? Because they restored the crown to its original glory. Moses came and said, 'The great, mighty, and awesome God,' in Deuteronomy chapter 10, verse 17. Then Jeremiah came, he said, 'Strangers are croaking in his sanctuary. Where is his awe?' Jeremiah chapter 32, verse 18, which means he omitted awesome. Then Daniel came, he said, 'Strangers are making slaves of his children. Where is his might?' Daniel chapter 9, verse 4, which means he omitted might.
Okay, these are not actual direct quotations for Daniel and for Jeremiah. I'm just gonna tell you straight up, I looked it up, right? So, some context to these verses, okay? So Moses in Deuteronomy is giving a speech, right? He says, "And now, O Israel, what does the Lord your God demand of you? Only this, to revere the Lord your God, to walk in his paths, to love him and serve your Lord with all your heart and soul, keeping the Lord's commandments and laws, which I enjoin upon you today for your good. Mark, the heavens to their utmost reaches belong to the Lord your God, the earth and all is in it. Yet it was to your fathers that the Lord was drawn in his love, that he chose you, their descendants from amongst all the peoples. Cut away the thickening of your hearts, etc. For the Lord your God is supreme and Lord supreme, the great, the mighty, and the awesome God, who shows no favor, takes no bribe, but upholds the cause of the fatherless and the widow." So it's giving, this is who God is. And Moses uses the words great and mighty and awesome. Now, there's a bit of text elsewhere that was in the essay, but not here, where it says, if someone comes up and he says, the great, the mighty, the awesome, the fabulous, the important, starts adding adjectives, you pull them aside, right? Because if you start adding adjectives, there's no end of adding adjectives, right? And once you start adding adjectives, then if you take one away, then it's less, right? Because here's the big complaint. The big complaint is that when Jeremiah comes along to talk about God in 32:18, Jeremiah says that you show kindness for the thousandth generation, but visit the guilt of the fathers upon them. O great and mighty God, whose name is Lord of hosts. He didn't mention awesome. Does that mean that Jeremiah thought that God was great and mighty, but not awesome? Because Moses said great, mighty, and awesome. And he's not saying awesome. Is he therefore suggesting that God is not awesome? And even worse, did you follow me what I'm saying, right? Mm-hmm. And even worse, when Daniel comes along, and Daniel's, talking about these things, and he's in verse 4 and following, and he prayed to the Lord my God, making confession thus, "O Lord, great and awesome God, who stays faithful," just great and awesome. There was no mighty. Okay, so oh my goodness.
They're taking powers away from God?
They're taking descriptions away. Right. It's like when you're describing someone, says, Bob, he's so kindly and saintly and good, and Bob says, and don't forget to mention my humility.
That's Rabbi Fierberger.
So they're suggesting there's a danger in adding descriptions, but clearly Jeremiah, who comes after Moses, if Jeremiah omits awesome, then I guess it's okay to talk about God not being awesome. And if Daniel omits mighty, we can talk about God not being mighty. But here, Diane, is where the answer is, the next paragraph.
Rabbi?
Yep.
It depends how you define great. Maybe great includes awesome.
They're two different words in the Hebrew. Okay? They are different words. Ha'el, Hagadol, Hagibor, V'Hanora. Okay? You all right?
Yeah. But the men of the great assembly said, on the contrary, here is the proof of God's might, that he overcomes his own inclination and is patient with the wicked. And here is the proof of God's awe. Were it not for the awe of God, how could a single nation of the 70 nations continue to exist?
And the men of the Great Assembly are the ones who put together the first paragraph of the Amidah, and they include all three. Right? Keep going.
But how could our teachers, Jeremiah and Daniel, uproot something which Moses had established? Rabbi Elazar answers, because they know that the Holy One, blessed be he, is truthful. Therefore, they did not lie to him.
Right. In other words, in their context, Jeremiah doesn't see God as being awesome. because Jeremiah is living in seeing Jerusalem destroyed. And so he's just not feeling the awe. And so he's not mentioning it. And look, God, you don't lie to me, I'm not going to lie to you. And Daniel is living in exile, right, in Persia. And Daniel's not seeing the might because they haven't been restored. So look, God, you never lie to me. I'm not going to lie to you. I don't see the might. But the men of great assembly say, no, you have to understand. How is God mighty? Because in Daniel's situation, God is withholding God's self. And who is mighty? The one who controls their anger, right? And in the case of Jeremiah, how awesome is it that our nation, we may be destroyed and put into exile, but we still exist. And how awesome is that? Okay. So what is Rabbi Elazar saying about God in giving this whole quote? How would you describe the God of Joshua ben Levi?
Great, mighty, and awesome.
Hmm?
Great, mighty, and awesome.
Great, mighty, awesome, but what else?
Truthful, apparently.
Truthful, and what else?
Patient.
Tolerant.
Tolerant, right? Can you go up to the President of the United States and tell them that they are lacking in a certain way? What will the response of that president be?
Depends on the president.
Depends on the president, okay?
Yeah.
If you come up to God and say, God, I'm finding the awesomeness lacking, what do you expect God to do to you after you say, by the way, this isn't so good. I'm not happy with it.
It's hidden for a while.
Hidden? Okay, expand on that.
Well,
God would say you're not very smart.
Right, but here God, does Daniel get turned to dust for his impudence to God?
no, he's being honest in his time. That's what is overt, and the other is, at least at that time, covert.
God doesn't have an ego problem, right? The great gods of Greece, right? The Greek gods, the other gods, they had ego problems. If you suggested they weren't able to do A, B, or C, it really upset them and you suffered horribly, right? That's half of the myths in the mythology there, is people insulting the god. My God, just don't insult the god, right? But here God is someone that you can have a relationship with, right? It's not like those other gods. You don't have to, pour on the flattery.
It's interesting that in Islam, there are 99 names for God, and you're supposed to recite them all. And I don't know what happens if you miss one, but never tried.
Well, we say that there's 72 names of God, but that's just for people who are bored, I think. I don't know. God knows whom God is.
He knows who God is.
Yeah, I guess.
Yes, grammar.
Yes. God knows who God is. Yes. God knows God's self. It doesn't need to be explained to God. Okay. Any questions on this little aspect, this little window into God's nature? You can stand up to God and survive.
Or you can call God in different ways depending on where you are at.
Yeah, absolutely. From your own personal experience.
it also, it's kind of interesting that we have a living language, the meaning of words changes.
Mhm.
And this is kind of saying, okay, these are the words we're gonna use,
Right.
the meanings sometimes change. So think of the word awesome, like
Oh,
nowadays,
sure.
people say awesome and they mean something completely different.
That's awesome.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Well, awesome.
Yeah.
Well,
It's
awesome.
overused.
And you know what? Yirah in Hebrew, which is awe, is the same way. Yirat manorah hamakom, how awesome this thing is.
Or how terrible.
Or, yamim noraim, the awesome days. So it has the same dual meaning in Hebrew as it does in English, which is to say, awe is, I'm very impressed because you're very powerful, right? The root of awe is, this is God and you are not, right? God is like the sun, really great at a distance, life-giving, get too close and you will be incinerated. It's awesome. The sun is awesome.
Isn't Nora also used as terrible in some way?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
You're not saying God is terrible.
Terrifying.
Okay.
So remember, terrible
Mhm.
doesn't just mean terrible. We understand terrible now. That's an English thing to say, oh, this is terrible. It doesn't taste very good. But terrible, when you describe, I'm Ozymandias the terrible,
Mhm.
or this the terrible, it's not saying he was a crappy king, right? Ivan the Terrible wasn't an inefficient, lackluster ruler. He was truly terrifying. That's why he's the terrible. Okay? Terrible has suffered the fate of awesome. It's lost some of the fear factor.
Earlier.
Oh, yes. Okay.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
But isn't that the point, that words have changed and we may not know exactly what that word meant in biblical times or subsequent to that, but we have our own interpretation of that word today.
Oh, yeah. Language does evolve over time. If you want to have a lot of fun, look up the word silly in the Oxford English Dictionary, 2nd edition, or 1st edition. And what's the very first definition of silly? Okay, because it goes historically, so it starts with the oldest meaning and then it comes up to the modern. And this is a sense where Shakespeare's talking about silly Scotland. Silly, which has a cognate in the German selig.
Holy.
Holy.
Oh.
Silly is holy. And then people who are touched by God, those holy people, they were silly. And the behavior of the people who are touched by God is silly. And then that's how silly comes to be, what we think of now. But the root of the word, the original meaning was holy. It's just changed over time. Sometimes words, Sheldon, you're absolutely right. Sometimes words come to mean the opposite over time, right? Like bad, if you're Michael Jackson. So, let's take a look at the second text. So this is from Brachot 3a. And so Brachot is the section of the Talmud that is talking about blessings. It's a good place to talk about God and blessings. And so Harriet, why don't you read first the first paragraph?
Rabbi Isaac ben Yitzchak ben Shmuel says in the name of Rav, there are 3 watches in the night, and at each and every watch, the Holy One, blessed be He, sits and roars like a lion and says, alas for the children, for on account of their sins, I destroyed my house and burned my sanctuary and exiled them among the nations of the world.
Okay. God roars like a lion. And why is God upset?
Because he creates something and then he had to destroy it.
Okay, and what does this sound like, for those of us who are parents? Or have had parents? Look what you made me do! Right? After they smack you, right? Look what you made me do! You made me punish you.
Didn't want to do it. It didn't want to do it.
Well, that doesn't still feel.
Okay. Sheldon, why don't you read this middle paragraph for us here? Oh, you just muted yourself again.
Sheldon?
Sheldon, you're mute.
Sorry.
There you go. Now we can hear you.
It was taught in a Bereda. Rabbi Yossi said, I was traveling on the road and went into one of the ruins of Jerusalem to pray. Elijah, of blessed memory, came to me and watched the door for me and waited there until I had finished my prayer. He said to me, peace to you, my master, my teacher. And then he said to me, my son, why did you go into a ruin? I said, to pray. He said, you should have prayed on the road. I replied, I thought that people passing by might interrupt my prayers. He said, you should have prayed a short version. And that is how I learned 3 things. Do not go into a ruin, pray on the road instead, and pray short versions when you do.
Okay. Continue on with the story. You're right in the middle.
You want me to continue?
Please.
Then he said, what sound did you hear in the ruin? I answered, I heard a kabat kol, a divine voice, like a dove. Alas for the children, for the account of their sins, I destroyed my house and burned my sanctuary and exiled them among the nations of the world. He said to me, by your life and the life of your head. This is not the only time the voice says that. Every single day, 3 times a day, it does so also. And not only that, but every time a person from Israel goes into a synagogue or a study house and answers the Kaddish with the words, may his great name be blessed, the Holy One nods his head and says, happy is the king who is praised in his house this way. What of the father who banishes his children? And alas, the children who are banished from their father's table.
Okay. What do you make of that so far?
Well, the notion of blessed be he and blessed be his name is Baruch Shema. I mean, but it's in, when you were naming the names of God, you missed one.
Yeah?
It was HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the
Ah,
Holy One, blessed be he. So this is coming back now.
that's true. That is the Kodesh Baruch Hu.
Yeah.
So, although I'm thinking each time it says the Kodesh Baruch Hu, it's usually after one of the names has been said.
Yeah, but it's a response.
Yeah.
It's a response to the name that probably you don't want to repeat or exactly say.
Right.
It's Baruch Hu Baruch Shemo is just at the end of a bracha.
Right, sure. Baruch Hu, Baruch Shema, yeah. So the Kodesh Baruch Hu is also one of these great names for God. Yep, you missed that one. So it's interesting to say, right? Alas for their children, on account of whose, I had to destroy the world. And then he also says, alas for my children, right? But what's the difference in valence between what Rabbi Isaac is saying and what Rabbi Yossi is saying? Now, Rabbi Isaac is saying, 3 times a night, the God roars like a lion, alas for my children. And Rabbi Yossi is saying that Elijah says 3 times a night or 3 times a day, God is cooing like a dove. The same words. Right? There's a difference between night and the difference between day.
Say it differently in the night and a different way during the day.
Yeah. So what can we learn from that?
That you have to bless God no matter when and where.
Yeah. And whether it's for good or whether it's for bad, right? And if you think about it this way, when the temple is existing, God is being praised in one place only. Now the temple's destroyed and we're scattered everywhere. God is being praised everywhere. Just
Rabbi,
a different way. Yeah.
if we were talking about an individual
Mhm.
had to hear himself be praised, we would say he has a maybe a self-image that needs to be reinforced. But that sounds like a human trait. And here we say God likes to hear people praise him.
Yeah, more than that, we like to say that if your loved one is in Gehinnom, in purgatory, and needs to be refined, that it will go better for your loved one if God is praised in honor of that loved one. So God sounds kind of like a narcissist here. So let's go out on a limb here. Why do you think it's important for God to want to be praised? Let's rehabilitate God here, shall we?
Wants to be recognized as who God is.
Right.
And therefore, you can, as long as you realize that he can be terrible in more than one way,
Right.
that is recognizing God and praising him in one way, but also maybe not praising him, but remembering that God is there.
So thinking of this in like a psychological term, what is God's motivation in having us praise God's name or praise God if it can't be because God is an egoist and just likes hearing God's name? What's the something more? What's a plausible alternative reason strategy of why our praising God's name should be a good idea?
To recognize we have a relationship with something beyond us.
Okay, to recognize that we're in a relationship, yeah. What else?
It's a recognition that God is there and God is everywhere.
Okay, it's a recognition that there is a God, yeah. And why is that a good thing?
Because we're acknowledging that God exists. And that is an affirmation of a belief in God that you can't see or doesn't know exactly what the characteristics of God really mean.
Okay, and the same question, and what's the advantage of that, of our acknowledging or being aware that there's a God? What's the advantage of that? What's the advantage to us for knowing that there's a God?
Reminding us that there's a covenant.
Reminding us there's a covenant, yeah, gives us hope, yeah. What else?
Makes us feel good.
Makes us feel good, yeah. So I want to offer the following. Yeah.
It tells us that there's something bigger and more important than us, and that perhaps we ought to follow a certain way of living.
Aha. Sheldon gets what I'm hinting at, which is to say, there is a God and you are not it. Okay?
Oh, that's a relationship.
Because what happens when people recognize there's a God and they say that God is great, they say God is greater than me, meaning I am not the center of the universe, I am not the most important thing, because when people think that they're like God, Ivan the Terrible, they do terrible things. Right.
But on the other hand, the idea that people are created in the image of God says that you're supposed to aspire to be like God. You can't be God.
Right.
You have to be like God or acknowledge that God exists and to follow what you think God wants of you.
Right. And so there's the famous text that we have at the beginning of the Sim Shalom prayer book, where it's quoted. It's not in the current, not in the Lev Shalem. They chose something different to study in the morning. Walk in God's ways. How do you follow in the ways of the Kodesh Baruch Hu? Well, God is, just as God is kind, you should be kind. Just as God is loving, you should be loving. Just as God is merciful, you should be merciful. Just as God is vindictive, you should be, and they pick and choose which ways of being like God you should be, right? But these are all good reasons. So in the Talmud, certainly, what's going on here is, in a certain way, God has a personality and God has an inner life. And God has regrets. Right? Woe for me, woe for the world, woe for the children that I had to do this thing. Right?
And these days, God has lots of regrets, I'm sure.
Right?
In some ways, I feel that God is almost being too humanized, though, with all these descriptive terms. I have a problem with that.
Okay, tell me about your problem with anthropomorphization of God.
Because I think the focus really is more on us than on God. And you know what? And it's almost like a proof to me that really God is unknowable, and yet we spend all this time, all this language, trying to understand who he is, or she, or it.
Yeah.
But we may never.
Yeah. So, thoughts on this anthropomorphization problem?
I guess you could say it's our way of trying to understand with the limited resources that we have, because God is unknowable, but we're trying to use whatever powers or resources we have to understand God's self.
We anthropomorphize everything. There's some turkey in the fridge that wants eating. It doesn't want to be eaten. It needs eating. It doesn't need to be eaten. It has no feelings. It's dead flesh, right? The grass likes to be walked on. The car is sitting pretty today. I think the engine's running fine. We're gonna go, right? We humanize everything because that's the way we understand the world, right?
It's because I think that those are the emotions we understand, and God, if in the ultimate sense, should be unknowable.
Right.
And how could we know something that's unknowable, that we have no experience with?
Yeah. Okay. So here's another approach to God. This one has a little bit of a zing to it.
When Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai became ill, the students ran to see him. When he saw them, he began to weep. The students said to him, "Light of Israel, right-handed pillar, strong hammer, why do you weep?" He said to them, "If I were being taken before a human king who was here one day and the next day is dead and buried, who, if he is angry with me, will not stay angry with me forever? Who, if he punishes me, will not punish me forever? And who, if he kills me, does not condemn me to everlasting death? The king who can appease with words or pride, who I can appease with words or pride. Even if that were the case, I would weep. Now I am being taken before the King of Kings, the Holy One, blessed be he, who exists forever and ever. If he is angry with me, he will be angry with me forever. If he punishes me, he will punish me forever. If he kills me, he will condemn me to everlasting death. I cannot appease him with words or pride. Not only that, but I see before me two paths. One leads to the Garden of Eden, and the other to Gehenna. And I do not know down which I shall be taken. Shall I not weep?
Okay, does Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai have a point? Is he wrong?
Doesn't it say that God is quick to forgive?
Yeah, but
He's quick to anger, too.
quick to anger too. Slow to anger. Well, I don't know. Here's the
Still
thing: is
angry.
once God makes up God's mind, that's it, right?
So he's in awe of this.
He's in awe, but what he's saying is, look, I should be terrified. I should be absolutely terrified down to my toes. Because if I was put before Caesar or before the king or the government or whomever, I would be terrified because they have life and death over me. And I can appease Caesar. I can flatter him. You can't flatter God. And then it's this next line that just kills me.
The student said to him, "Master, please bless us," he said. "May the fear of heaven be upon you like the fear of human beings." The student said to him, "Is that all?" He said to them, "Don't you understand? When a man wants to commit a transgression, what does he say? I hope nobody sees."
Right. How seriously do we take God in our day-to-day activity as compared to, say, the IRS, customs, or
But you can't lie to God. God knows what you are thinking theoretically.
and yet, which am I more likely to do? Cheat on a question of kashrut or cheat on my taxes?
You might feel more guilty of cheating on kashrut if you keep kosher. If you don't
Yeah.
keep kosher, it wouldn't bother you at all.
Right. But which am I more likely to not follow through on?
Cheating on your taxes.
Yeah, we have much greater fear of the king of flesh and blood than we do have the when you say, I hope nobody sees what I'm doing. But God sees everything that you're doing and you don't care. Right? So in a way, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is kind of speaking the awkward truth, which is to say, we say God is very, we don't take, we might take God literally, but we don't take God seriously. Maybe we don't take God literally either, I don't know. But we don't take God seriously. Because we don't have to, right? You know, you can sin every day of your life and thrive. Lots of examples.
You can pray every day of your life and not survive.
Yeah.
And you do, that will be true.
So that's kind of this awareness of, you know, this is not like the volcano, where, I mean, volcano gods, you take them very seriously. When you sacrifice something to the volcano god, it is gone forever. When you dedicate something as hekdesh for the purpose of God, you can still eat it, and then you're just in violation of stealing from God, right? But once you give the piece of fruit to the volcano, it's gone.
Maybe there's another explanation. If God is always with you, you become numb to the fact that he's there.
Mm.
It becomes a numbers game, really. I mean, you do something.
But April 15th, you know that they're going to look at your taxes.
Oh yeah.
But we don't have enough IRS people to challenge everybody's taxes. So most people get away with it. So, but I suggest that you look at what I just gave you.
Yeah.
It said that Yud-Hey Vav-Hey is the god of volcanoes.
Sure.
And but that's what it is.
Oh, sure.
Saying that it is
Pillar of cloud by day and fire by night is clearly a volcano.
Yes.
Everybody knows that.
Sure, you think about it all the time, but that particular Torah.com
Yeah.
really gets to me because it's saying that, you know, God is not from the root of being, it's from the word of, I don't know, exploding kind of thing. Not exploding, but anyway, that it's not what we think it means. It doesn't say what we think it says.
Right. Absolutely. Let's take a look at three more texts. So two of them are on this page. So Sanhedrin 6:5 is the Mishnah. Rabbi Meir said, when a person is in pain, it's as if the Shekhinah says, my head is hurting me, or my arm is hurting me. This means that God, Hamakom, is in pain about the blood of the wicked which is shed, how much more so when it is the blood of the righteousness, right? And this reminds me of the story of the old couple, or the young couple, who goes to see the doctor, and, you know, the woman's foot is hurting. And what is what's going on? And the man says, our foot hurts us, right? Our foot hurts us. So this here is, you know, I think it's saying that, you know, the presence of God, if God is present with us, God is feeling through us in a way. We're all kind of avatars. It's a cute little thing. More about the Shekhinah. It was taught in a baraita. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai said, "Come and see how much the Holy One, blessed be He, loves the children of Israel. Wherever they were exiled, the Shekhinah is with them. When they were exiled to Egypt, the Shekhinah was with them, as it says, was it not revealed? Yes, revealed to your father's house when you were in Egypt. When they were in exile in Babylon, the Shekhinah went with them, as it says, for your sake I was sent to Babylon. And at the time they are destined to be redeemed, Shekhinah will be with them, as it says, and Adonai your God will return your captivity." It does not say will cause to return, it says return. This teaches that the Holy One, blessed be, will return with them from captivity. And there's this whole notion of the Shekhinah and tracking, it's like, there's a website where you can track where Elon Musk's car is in space. Like it's in orbit, it's crossing the orbit of Mars right now. Remember he launched a car into space? About 5 years ago.
A Tesla?
Yeah, on top of a rocket. Anyways, you can track where it is, right? So it's like there's almost a website, where's Shekhinah now? It was between the Kruvim, and then it was at the curtain, and then it was at the entrance, and then it was at the gate, and then it left the city, and then it followed us.
But not in this period maybe, but eventually the Shekinah is seen as the feminine aspect of God.
Yeah.
And that is the God of mercy.
Right.
That God, the masculine, is the God of power and might, and you should fear that God.
Yeah.
But Shekinah is the loving aspect of God. It's the feminine aspect of God. It's also part of God. But, we sometimes tend to forget it when we're giving adjectives to God. We don't necessarily give God the feminine adjectives that you might give to the Shekinah.
Oh, sure. And the tradition later on is terrified of feminizing God to the point that Yedid Nefesh comes down to us in two girsaot, in two forms. One, masculine mishnaic and masculine post-mishnaic, which is to say they're both in masculine, it's just the mishnaic masculine looks feminine. So we better change them to modern masculine because people might get confused and think, God forbid, God is masculine.
Heaven forbid.
Or maybe he was also referring to God in a feminine form.
Well, you can't know that because the Hebrew doesn't have an it. It's either masculine or feminine, because that's the way the language works.
So that's true. So what is this notion that God's presence follows us into exile? What does it mean for us that God's presence follows us?
God is with us.
Yeah. Yeah, and in the context of the biblical worldview, gods tend to stay in their position, in their location. So the gods of Egypt hang out in Egypt. The gods of Babylon hang out in Babylon. The gods of Babylon never march into Egypt, and the gods of Egypt never march into Babylon. And let's be fair, the God of Israel never talks to Jacob after Jacob leaves the land, and never talks to them for 400 years, all the exile. And finally, God talks to Moses in Midian, right? But not in Egypt, right? So our God is extraordinary in that our God follows us around, whereas other gods stay put.
They're localized.
Right. Most places are a God of a location. Ours is a God of a people. It's a family God. We take God with us.
But I thought God was ubiquitous. He's everywhere.
Well, yeah, that's the larger expansion. So, if you look through Bible, God is thought of in different ways in different parts of the Bible, right? Our modern view is, oh yeah, God's everywhere. But, even Jacob says, God was in this place and I didn't know it, right? He was open to the possibility.
And, earlier on, they were saying, don't pray in ruin.
Yeah.
That's the point, right?
Right.
God is portable, you don't need to go
Right.
to the Jerusalem ruin in order to
Right.
pray. And in fact, if you're a woman and you wanted to go to a Jerusalem ruin right now, you'd have a hard time doing it.
So a couple more texts. So Arlene, why don't you read it?
Oh, okay. Mishnah, if when a person is praying, he says, "May your name be mentioned for good," people should silence him. Gemara, we understand why he is silenced. If he says, "May your name be mentioned for good," because this implies for the good only and not for evil. And it has been taught a person must bless God for evil just as they bless God for good.
Okay, so I had some fun in a bookstore. Well, I thought it was fun. Some years ago, where it was in the Bible section, and there were these Bible believers there. And I said to them, God's the source of all evil in the universe. Oh, that really upset them. No, it's the devil. I said, no, look at Isaiah. Look at Isaiah. We quote Isaiah, we misquote Isaiah every day in our prayers, right?
Kadosh, kadosh, kadosh.
No. Well, that too. But in the morning blessings, right after Baruch Hu, right? How does it go after Baruch Hu? Baruch Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. How does the line after the Baruch Hu? Borei or uvorech choshech oseh shalom uvorech tov. Right. God who makes light and darkness, makes good and everything. That's a misquotation. In Isaiah, it says, "Praise be God who creates light and fashions darkness, makes good and creates evil." In our daily prayer, we thought we'd soften it to say everything, because everything includes evil. But in the text, it's clear. God is the source of evil, right? How could God not be the source of evil?
Right, because who else could have created anything?
Right. If God is not the source of evil, then something else is the source of evil, and therefore God is not the source of everything. Right? And that is to postulate an equal and opposite, nearly equal and opposite bad God. And we don't like that, because that's dualism. Right?
I think there's another way of looking at it. Evil is done by mankind.
Mm-hmm.
God created man, he created evil.
Okay, so let's take a look at this, okay? The insurance industry understands theology, right? So does the tax department. If I win at the horse races or I win at the lottery, what is that called technically?
Taxable event.
It's a windfall.
Yeah.
Windfalls, right? But if my house is destroyed in a flood, or there's a hurricane, or there's a tornado,
It's an act of God.
it's an act of God. Okay, the insurance industry understands it. It's an act of God.
And therefore, they don't have to pay for it.
Right.
Yeah.
And a hurricane, a flood, a fire, lightning strike. If what happened in Turkey this week is not evil, tell me what is. Tell me what is.
Also happened in Syria.
Yeah. Yeah.
Israel is sending help to Turkey.
Oh, sure.
What about Syria?
I don't know about that.
Oh, that's what's advertised.
Any event, right? You must bless God for evil just as they bless God for good. When someone dies, Baruch Dayam Ha.
Amen, right.
Okay? But there's a spin on it, of course. And here's the spin. Fran, if you like.
A person must bless God for evil. In what kind of situation? For example, if a flood swept over his land, even though it will be a good thing for him in the end, because the land will have acquired extra sediment and be more rich. For the moment, it is still evil.
Aha! In every evil thing, there can be a glimmer of good. And that's why you bless them.
Okay, so after every fire, eventually life will emerge.
Yeah. I mean, Chicago was able to put together a lovely grid pattern after the Great Chicago Fire, right?
Wouldn't have it otherwise.
Hmm?
Wouldn't have it otherwise.
That's right. And, God forgive me, if there had not been the Holocaust, would the UN have created a nation for the Jews? Probably not. Probably not.
Well, yeah, it was sort of a guilt offering,
Yeah.
but not everybody acknowledged that.
I understand.
Yeah,
So, just as they bless the good, Harriet, why don't you give us that?
just as they bless God for good in what kind of situation. For example, if a person finds something valuable, even though it would be a bad thing for him in the end, because if the king hears about it, he will take it. For the moment, it's still good.
Aha, that's the windfall.
Yes, that's a windfall, yes.
Right,
But,
you know,
but the king gets a share.
that's true.
Well, it's like the IRS.
Yeah.
It is, it's like the IRS, you know? It's like, wow, you know, you won the lottery and now suddenly you owe $25 million in taxes. It's like, what the heck happened there?
And if a man's wife is pregnant, then he says, may God grant that my wife give birth to a boy. This is a prayer in vain.
Yeah, that's a terrible prayer.
It's a terrible prayer because whatever it is, and whatever comes, good or bad, boy or girl, you'll take whatever comes
Right.
and you'll praise God for it.
Right. It's, you know, when you see smoke coming up over the horizon and you see the fire trucks going by, what are you supposed to pray?
But nobody gets killed.
That the firemen will be safe, yeah.
Mhm.
And that hopefully no one will be killed who hasn't been killed already. But you can't say, I hope it's not my house,
That's what you shouldn't say.
because
You
it
can
already
say-
is or it already isn't.
If it's going to be, it's going to be. But you
Yeah.
can see it coming, but you're right.
Yeah. So, what can we say about the God of the Talmud and comparing it to the God of the Bible? Right? Last week we talked about the God of the Bible, and that seemed to be a different kind of God, or is this the same God or a different God?
Same God, but we've evolved, I guess.
So has our understanding of God, is the understanding of God in the Bible different than the understanding of God in the Talmud?
Well, in the Talmud, you argue about it.
Mhm.
In the Torah, you can't.
Yeah.
It is there because it is written.
Yeah.
Where is it written? It's written there. Sheldon.
Yeah, I think that one of the major differences, is following up with what Harriet said, is that the Bible is more broad, but the Talmud dissects the different aspects of God.
Mhm. I think the Talmud's a bit more nuanced, right? The Talmud allows for God to have a greater emotional spread, and for us to have a more intimate relationship with. And it's also trying to give us some practical aspects.
Well, the Talmud allows Jews to live with the Bible.
Mhm.
Because the Bible is sort of more definite and all kinds of strange stuff
Right.
turn up in the Talmud.
And the Talmud can't do what the Bible does. The Bible allows God to behave in ungodlike ways. But the Talmud cannot suggest that God is behaving in those ways. The Talmud is limited by our conception of what a good God should be like in describing God.
Well, because God is good in most times for most people,
Mhm.
but there are times when God isn't good.
Mhm.
But the Talmud seems to recognize that,
Mhm. Mhm.
but the Torah can't.
Mhm.
I mean, it's canonized. So it's the Talmud by now, but
Yeah. So it's an interesting, different take, slightly different nuance on how we approach God, right? And the Talmud is also lamenting the fact that we don't take God seriously. In the Bible, they take God seriously.
but the Talmud is admitting that we don't actually know what God is, or
Yeah.
how we can talk about him, how we can talk about God. No gender involved here. It's non-binary. There's still an underlying idea that God is good.
Yeah. You just have to, maybe you can't see it,
You
at
can't.
first.
You can't see God.
Yeah.
Then you can't really understand God.
I mean, what Harry was saying, in the Bible,
Mhm.
God is absolute,
Mhm.
but in the Talmud, it seems as if it's a bunch of rabbis with their interpretations
Mhm.
wrestling
Right.
with what God is, and showing the rest of us that, you know, it's
We're allowed
okay
to
to
do
wrestle.
that, yeah.
And there's more nuance then.
Yeah, so
So-
it's like they're opening the
yeah.
door.
So next time we're gonna look at, the God in Midrash, and let me say 3 words about Midrash. If I see the word Midrash, and I say, define this, what is Midrash?
Story.
It's story,
I think it's an explanation for things where the explanation in the Torah isn't clear.
okay? So Midrash is the rabbinic imagination. So, for example, if the text says, Abraham, take your son, your only one, the one you love, Isaac, and go and offer him on a mountain that I'm going to show you.
Mhm.
The rabbis say, wait a minute, there's a problem with this verse.
Mhm.
It could have said, take your son. Or it could have said, take your only son, only one. Or it could have said, take the one you love. Or it could have just said Isaac, right? But this is redundant. This is redundant 4 times over.
But it explains that Isaac is not his only son, and that he probably loves, and actually Abraham does love his other son, and so just probably should have just said take Isaac.
I think it's making a point though. God's asking him to sacrifice Isaac, and he's making the point, even though he's your only son, even though you love him.
Right.
Yeah, but God.
Right. And I don't want to argue the intent of the text. Because that's pshat. You guys are operating on pshat, which is straight meaning. But midrash, drash is the imagination. The imagination says, this is a telephone call and we're only hearing 1/2 of it. God says, take your son. Abraham says,
Which one?
which one? Your only one.
I don't have to.
He says, both are only to their mothers.
Mhm.
The one you love. I love both. Isaac. Fine. Okay? That's Midrash. Midrash is imagining another layer that the text is only the notes, and the Midrash fills in the rest of the story.
Things that are not clear from the text because it's not what the text says.
Although the text is perfectly clear, couldn't be more clear, as you said. It's like,
But
this
which one.
identifies one thing.
That's right, it identifies what it's meant, but doesn't make sense to people who are interpreting it and who know something else, that Isaac is not his only son, and that he doesn't think of Isaac.
It makes perfect sense because this is the way that God talks, because God takes, leave your land, your father's house, the place you grew up, and go to. Like, it's just, God likes talking about things in threes. It's just a rhetorical style.
Trinity.
Right. Okay, everyone, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you ever so much. This is great.
Okay.